Hello and welcome to Book Review. Today we're going to be talking about Dostoevsky, Notes from Underground. It's the first Dostoevsky book I've ever read. I always want at least to take down some Russian literature in the winter when it's cold out, because it's always cold in the books and they're big and long and you can just read the book for hours inside. Although this is actually a small book, it's not a big one, but a lot of them are huge. And, I like them. They're fun. So we're going to talk about this one today. Dostoevsky is a crazy motherfucker. His life's kind of brutal. He was born in Moscow in 1821. His mother died when he was 15, and his first novel came out in the 1840s, when he was in his 20s, called Poor Folk. However, due to his involvement in what would, I guess, have been considered radical political activity, he was sentenced to death. Now, this actually blew my mind. Dostoevsky's death sentence, when they say that he was sentenced to death and then instead he got sent to prison camp, literally he was carted out to the site of the execution. They were grouped into groups of 3, and they were going to shoot him, and then a cart came by with a note that said, "Hey, never mind, don't kill him." So when he was sentenced to death, he was within an hour of dying or whatever. That's how close he got. Instead, got the very nice alternative of spending 4 years in a Siberian prison camp, followed by 6 more years in military service in exile, whatever that means, somewhere out in the boonies of Russia in the 1800s. Brutality. And then after all that, he started to really get to work as a writer, and he wrote most of his most famous work, including Notes to the Underground in the 60s, and then later on stuff like Crime and Punishment, The Brothers Karamazov, The Idiot, and many, many, many more. So I read Notes from Underground. I actually just kind of chiefed it in one session, took the whole thing down, left the house, left my phone at home, went to a coffee shop, had a coffee, had a couple of beers, read the whole book. And I really was shocked by it. I was a little bit thrown off by it. It's a very strange book, but I loved it. I found it to have a very intense, negative energy, which I found captivating, a lot like some of my favorite music, like the band Daughters, the heavy grindcore metal band, or the band Death Grips, or Meshuggah, or just any of these really intense bands. It really reminded me of some of that. There's so much going on in this book. The Wikipedia gives a basic kind of description as thus: it presents itself as an excerpt from the rambling memoirs of a bitter, isolated, unnamed narrator. So the first part is basically someone just rambling in their diary, the underground man, as he is referred to, who metaphorically lives in the crawl space under the floorboards, where only the rats can fit. He doesn't literally live there. He's it infers that he's some kind of civil servant, works for the government in some low capacity, and quit the job when he inherited some money. But the narrator is very unreliable. The first couple sentences are apparently kind of infamous. I come to realize: I am a sick man. I am a wicked man. An unattractive man. I think my liver hurts. Just that's the first couple of lines of the book. So that gives you a little bit of an idea if you've never read Dostoevsky. I really wanted to read this because so many of my friends have read Dostoevsky. It's such a big name in literature, and a lot of interesting people I know have said they read this stuff early on in their lives and it influenced them. One of my good friends told me he read this book when he was 13 and it sent him spiraling into a depression. So that's something. I was told by someone else it's a very bad idea to read this book entirely in one day. I was told that after it was already too late. I was like, why? Why not? They said because it's just not a very uplifting book. It is a very brutal book. Basically, the characters of the first part, he's just rambling about all this negativity. There's a lot of interesting quotes. Have you noticed that the most refined bloodshedders have almost all been the most civilized gentlemen? So, he's kind of going on about how people who have all this reason, all these fancy reasons and philosophies and doing good, and, they're all just bullshit. He says that, quote, one's own free and voluntary wanting, one's own caprice, however wild, one's own fancy, though chafed sometimes to the point of madness, it is the same profitable profit which does not fit into any classification. So he says basically all the systems, all the ideas, they all leave out the wanting. We have the reason. We have the desire to do good based on reason and based on, he doesn't say it, but based on religions and ethics and this and that. But really those things don't account for the wanting. And I found this to be kind of interesting, and I definitely taken a good amount of, motivational and educational and inspirational type material. I try to find it to be useful, not just bland, you can do it. You can do it. I try to find stuff, with a little more than that. But I do listen to a lot of positivity type stuff, and this is a real takedown of all that, and I just kind of enjoyed it because there is a definite truth, a serious truth, the idea of it's easy to construct this false narrative of how life is beautiful and you're doing everything for the right reasons and stuff, and it's yeah, okay, maybe that is possible, but I think people also very often fool themselves and either naively or sort of unhealthily, like kind of an addiction to a certain thought pattern. They just want everything to be nice and everything's good and it all works out for the right reason. And, you know, I don't know. I think most people end up having these sorts of mindsets shattered when bad things happen or when they just don't feel good for a long enough time. They can't hold their positive mental attitude. It's just basically a giant anti-positive mental attitude book. It's like, don't try to be positive. Like, what you really feel is whatever, of kind of what he's saying. And it seems like a very anti-free will approach. One other note that I took right at the part, chapter 2 of the first part, was he talks about that to, here's a quote, that to be overly conscious is a sickness, a real thorough sickness. And he goes on to say that, like, you know, even a tiny bit of the consciousness we have would be plenty to get through life and to be happy, and to have more than that is a bad idea. Reminded me of a Banksy piece. There's a Banksy piece I've seen that has someone staring at like a fake painting of a nice picture, and then someone looking over the painting and seeing the terrible ruins in the distance, and it's nasty, and then someone way up high who can see over the ruins and can see the sunset. And it's kind of like the idea that at first things seem good and then things seem really scary and terrible, but then if you can keep going, eventually with even more knowledge and consciousness, you kind of reach this ultimate peak of beauty where you can see it all and it's actually quite nice. So I thought that was kind of like the character here is like stuck in part 2 where he can only see the nastiness just above the veneer of pleasantry, but he can't see above both to see the true, just open isness of it all, the nowness, the whatever, you know, that defies explanation. In part 2 of the book, after the rambling madness, excuse me, the narrator explains a scene from earlier in his life. And again, a very unreliable narrator, so that, you know, who knows really, there's not really much of a connection to the first part other than the personality. It's very loose, very postmodern. But he tells a story of a time where he basically invites himself out to dinner with some friends. Doesn't really have any money, gets drunk. Also, when I say friends, I really mean coworkers, and they don't really like him, and they don't want him to come, but they kind of have to because he like inserts himself in, and he knows what he's doing, but he wants to do it anyway because he doesn't care. Because, excuse me, because he's gonna do whatever the fuck he wants, even if no one else likes him. He's just gonna do it anyways. He's in this very nasty mindset of, you know, whatever. I am just a wicked man, an ugly man, and he's going out doing his thing. Goes to dinner, makes a fool of himself, gets drunk, doesn't have enough money, begs for money from somebody, goes somewhere else, runs into a woman of the night at a brothel who is, you know, potentially selling her body for sex to people, but he is just laying there drunk on the floor at like 2 a.m. and ends up in some kind of weird philosophical conversation with the lady about, you know, she's like, I could work my way up at this brothel, and blah, 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 and he's like, no, it's society, it's bullshit, which, you know, given that it's a brothel, seems like a pretty reasonable argument. Doesn't seem like a very a good situation that the lady's in that particular case. And she ends up going to his house later, and then he just treats her like shit, and then the book ends, and it's just miserable. It's miserable. All about basically just the folly of the negativity of mankind and like the just bland wanting. But really the thing is, this book, it doesn't describe what happens if you do the things you want with passion and integrity. It describes what happens if you're a whiny loser who just does the absolute most self-destructive things at every turn and is unable to like filter any of one's thought. You know, this is like an example of the worst kind of a train wreck of what a person's life could be like. Just like, you know, just hitting yourself in the face with a fucking hammer over and over again, you know? And it makes a very interesting point by just displaying this neuroticism, making the character so neurotic and just angry and crazy. By making it such an exaggerated thing, it kind of shocks you into seeing this part of the human condition, even if you like walk it back to 10% in your head, like, okay, I'm not like that, I'm only like 5% like that, but then you're like, damn, that's fucked up still, just because you see how crazy it is in full form. I guess when people read this when they're younger, it can really fuck them up because it can convince them that life is just despair and misery and we don't have free will and therefore we're stuck in these traps of these patterns that drive us through pain and no escape and it's meaningless. But I think it's really ultimately just a cool exercise in tapping into like some really, you know, dark ideas and philosophy and just kind of looking at it and being like, this is a thing that can happen. And you can imagine yourself or someone you know, or maybe a past self or a idea of a character that could end up easily doing these kinds of things in real life. People do terrible things all the time. They steal and cheat and lie, and they absolutely like do horrible things, and sometimes they know what they're doing. Sometimes they don't want to do them, and they're doing them anyway, even though it's bad. So I feel like this book is really resonant in regards to just being like, there's a lot of fucked up shit in the human psyche, and this book will tell you a thing or two about it. Overall, I definitely enjoyed Notes from Underground. I'm looking forward to reading some more. This is my second big Russian literature novel. I read Anna Karenina back in the day by Tolstoy. Enjoyed it very much. One of my favorite books, I would say. You know, it's up there. But I'm definitely trying to read some more Dostoevsky. I got some more recommendations, so I'm going to pick up some more stuff as soon as I can in physical form. I'm not reading that shit on a screen. I want to read real-ass books now. I'm done with ebooks for now. I just don't like those. I want real books. Real books, please. Thanks for watching this episode of Book Review. What do you think? Are you a Dostoevsky fan? Have you read this one, Notes from Underground? If so, what's your thought on it? What do you think? How did you feel about it? When did you read it in your life, and what kind of impact did it have on you? If you have recommendations for other books you think I should read, especially some cool Russian literature, let me know your favorites. I'm taking recommendations. Winter's another month or two, you know? I mean, it's only February. Usually it takes till April for things to warm up, so I got some more runtime before I want to switch out of the miserable winter Russian literature genre. So hit me up, smash the like button, subscribe. Thanks a lot for watching. This is the Quixotic Flux channel. My name is Matt Sokol, the man, the myth, the legend, and you are a legend as well for watching. Be well, be creative, and until next time, have a fantastic night. Goodbye.